I scanned the wilderness from my spot in the fire lookout tower, watching sunlight spread over the sea of pines. From up here, the forest looked peaceful, massive and wild, but quiet. That's what I liked about it. My coffee mug warmed my hands as I completed my first sweep of the day. Nothing but trees and more trees, which was exactly what I wanted to see. No smoke, no problems. Just me and 20,000 acres of forest that I got paid to stare at all day. After Anna left last year, this isolation became more than just a job. It became a refuge. Our divorce papers had been finalized just 3 weeks before I accepted this posting. Perfect timing, really. While most people would lose their minds being stuck in a glass box on stilts for months at a time, I found it calming. Nobody asking how I was doing with that tone in their voice. Nobody suggesting maybe I should put myself out there again. Just me, the trees, and the sky. I set my mug down on the small desk where my logbook lay open. Every morning followed the same pattern. Wake up at 5, coffee by 5:15. First visual sweep by 6 by. Radio check-in with Ranger Fleming by 6:30. I picked up the handset. Tower 7 to base, morning check-in. Fleming's scratchy voice came back almost immediately. Morning, Oliver. Anything to report? Clear skies, wind from the northwest, about 8 miles per hour, visibility excellent. Good to hear. Stay sharp. That was it. No small talk, no wasted words. Fleming understood the value of silence, which was why we got along. I recorded the weather readings in my log, noting barometric pressure, humidity, and wind speed. The Forest Service liked their data, and I liked having something measurable to focus on. The temperature was climbing. My tower wasn't much, but after nearly 4 months, it felt like home. 364 square feet with windows on all sides, a small kitchen with a propane stove, a twin bed in one corner, a desk for my logs and maps, a table for meals and games of solitaire. The bathroom was cramped, just enough space to turn around in the shower. I spent the morning doing what I always did, watching the forest through my binoculars, sector by sector, looking for any hint of smoke or unusual activity. By noon, I'd made another entry in the logbook and eaten a peanut butter sandwich while standing at the window facing south. The afternoon passed like all the others before it. I read a few chapters of an old Western novel I'd found in the tower when I arrived. The previous lookout had left behind a small library of paperbacks with broken spines and yellowed pages. I'd worked my way through most of them already. As the sun sank, the forest glowed. This was my favorite time of day. I turned on my transistor radio, catching a classic rock station from a distant town where the signal faded in and out. Dinner was canned stew heated on the stove. I ate while watching darkness creep across the forest floor, switching on my small lamp when I couldn't see my food anymore. After washing up, I dealt myself another game of solitaire, red and black cards sliding across the worn tabletop while Johnny Cash crackled through the radio's tiny speaker. Most people would call this lonely, but after the painful conversations and failed counseling sessions with Anna, silence felt like a blessing. Here, I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. Supply deliveries came once every 2 weeks. Ranger Fleming would drive up the service road with boxes of canned goods, fresh produce that would last maybe 3 days, and occasionally a small luxury like real coffee or chocolate. Those brief interactions were usually just business, checking equipment, going over protocols, handing off written reports. "You holding up okay, Oliver?" he'd ask. During the last delivery, studying my face a little too carefully. "Never better," I told him, and meant it. The only other person I saw regularly was Rain Harvey from Tower 5, about 7 miles northeast. She hiked over every couple of weeks, claiming she needed the exercise, though I suspected she just wanted to see another person. I didn't mind. Rain was easy to talk to, never pushed about personal stuff, and always brought homemade cookies that were worth any conversation. My days followed a routine. Wake, watch, log, read, sleep. Sometimes I saw hikers on the trails below and tracked them with my binoculars, but they never approached my tower. The main trails all led east toward the lakes and campsites. On the morning of the 36th day of fire season, yes, I kept count. Everything changed. I was making my first circuit of the morning, coffee in hand, when something caught my eye at ground level, something that didn't belong. I set down my mug and grabbed the binoculars. Footprints circling my tower. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was seeing things, but when I looked again, they were still there. Small, barefoot human prints in the soft dirt around the base of my tower, creating an almost perfect circle. My first thought was kids playing a prank, but that made no sense. The nearest trailhead was miles away, and no one had driven up the service road. I would have heard a vehicle. These prints seemed to come directly out of the tree line, as if someone had stepped right out of the dense forest and walked around my tower. And why barefoot? The terrain out here would tear up unprotected feet in minutes. Pine needles, rocks, roots. I hurried down the stairs, taking them two at a time, and pushed open the door at the bottom. The morning air hit my face as I stepped outside, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Nothing stirred except birds and the occasional squirrel. The footprints were strange up close. They were small, like a woman's or a teenager's, and perfectly formed in the dirt. I crouched down to examine them. They appeared at the edge of the trees, with no sign of how the person had approached. They ended the same way, disappearing back into the forest as if the walker had melted into the pines. I stood up, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. This wasn't right. People didn't just appear out of nowhere, 40 miles from the nearest town, walk barefoot around a fire tower, and vanish back into the wilderness. Back inside, I grabbed the radio. Tower 7 to base. Tower 7 to base, come in. Nothing but static. Tower 7 to base. Fleming, you there? I've got a situation here. More static with maybe the faintest echo of a voice buried in the noise. Too distorted to make out. I tried again. Tower 7 to any station. I have unidentified visitor activity at my location. Please respond. The radio crackled uselessly. This happens sometimes. Weather conditions or equipment issues could cut communication for hours or even a day. But the timing couldn't have been worse. I went back to the window, looking down at those footprints. They bothered me more than they probably should have. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe. I checked my service pistol in its lockbox. I wasn't supposed to carry it, unless there was a specific threat. But right now, those footprints qualified as specific enough for me. I clipped the holster to my belt. Then I stood at the window for a long time, staring at the place where the prints vanished into the trees. I had a choice to make. I could stay in my tower, safe behind glass and wood, and wait for the radio to start working again. The reasonable, protocol-following choice. Or I could follow those prints into the forest and find out who or what had made them. The forest felt alive as I made my choice. The gaps between the trees now appearing as hiding spots. I followed the small barefoot prints into the forest, pushing aside low-hanging branches as I ventured deeper than my usual patrol routes. The weight of my service pistol pressed against my hip. Not exactly comforting, but better than nothing. The morning air hung cool and still among the ancient pines, their massive trunks stretching upward like silent watchers. My radio crackled, with static every few minutes. I tried calling base again, but got nothing but broken fragments of response. Great. Just what I needed while tracking mysterious footprints into uncharted territory. The footprints themselves made no sense. They were small, like a woman's, or maybe a teenager's, and perfectly formed in the soft forest floor. What bothered me most was how direct they were. No wandering, no hesitation, just a straight line deeper into one of the oldest sections of Whiteridge Forest. I checked my watch. Almost an hour since I'd left the tower. The rational part of my brain suggested turning back, reporting the tracks when communications cleared up. But something about their deliberate path pulled me forward. The trees grew more massive as I walked, giants that had stood for centuries. Light filtered through the thick canopy in dusty beams that barely reached the forest floor. My boots crunched over fallen pine needles and the occasional twig. The tracks I followed left no such sound behind, just perfect bare impressions in the dirt. 2 miles in, the dense trees opened suddenly into a small clearing. I slowed my pace, hand instinctively moving closer to my holster. She stood in the center of the clearing, her back to me. Copper-red hair fell in wild waves down to her waist, catching the filtered sunlight in a way that made it look almost alive. She wore a thin white sundress that seemed impossibly clean and completely out of place in the middle of a national forest. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, suddenly very aware I was 2 miles from my tower with spotty radio connection. "Hello?" I called. She turned slowly. Her face was pale and delicate, with high cheekbones and unusually large eyes that fixed on me with an intensity that made me step back. "Hello?" she replied, her voice musical and distant, like she was speaking from across a large room instead of 20 feet away. "You must be Carter Oliver." The fact that she knew my name sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept my face neutral, years of training kicking in. "I'm Forest Service. Are you lost?" I asked, not confirming my identity. She smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "My name is Sage Grant, and yes, I believe I am." She looked around the clearing as if seeing it for the first time. I was walking and became disoriented. I nodded, studying her. No backpack, no water bottle, no hiking boots. Her feet were completely bare, and now that I looked closer, impossibly clean for someone who'd been walking through miles of forest floor. No dirt, no scratches, nothing. "How did you get out here, Ms. Grant?" "This area is pretty remote." "I walked," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "The forest called to me." "Right, one of those types. Probably some spiritual retreat visitor who wandered off trail." But that didn't explain how she knew my name, or how she'd walked miles in bare feet without a single scratch. "Well, it's not safe out here alone. I can guide you back to my fire tower. From there, we can arrange transport back to wherever you're staying." "That would be kind, Carter Oliver." The way she emphasized my full name sent an involuntary chill through me. Nobody used my full name like that. It sounded wrong coming from her lips, like she was tasting each syllable. I gestured toward the path I'd come from. "It's about 2 miles that way. Can you manage in bare feet?" "Oh yes," she said, stepping forward with a grace that seemed almost choreographed. "I find the earth quite accommodating." We began walking back toward my tower, me leading a few paces ahead, her following with light steps that barely seemed to touch the ground. I kept glancing back, trying to understand how she navigated the rough terrain. Exposed roots, sharp stones, fallen branches, without any sign of discomfort or injury. "You live in that tower alone, Carter Oliver?" she asked after several minutes of silence. "It's my job," I replied, not liking how she phrased the question. "I'm a fire lookout. A watcher," she said, her voice taking on an almost reverent quality. "You watch the forest all day from above." "How interesting." "It's mostly routine," I said. "Weather readings, radio check-ins, scanning for smoke." "And you enjoy this solitude?" Her question came with a strange intensity. "It suits me. Yes, she nodded slowly. I can see that it would. After your wife left, you needed space to heal. I stopped abruptly, turning to face her. How do you know about my wife? Sage tilted her head, that vacant smile returning. You seem like a man who has experienced loss. I merely guessed. But it wasn't a guess. It was too specific, too accurate. I felt my hand drift toward my pistol again, then forced it back to my side. She was just a lost hiker. A strange one, yes, but not a threat. We continued walking, but now an uncomfortable silence hung between us. I found myself walking faster, wanting to get back to my tower where I could radio for assistance. Do you keep food in your tower, Carter Oliver? She asked suddenly. Some supplies, I said, keeping my answer vague. Standard provisions? Anything sweet? The question had an eagerness that made me uneasy. Just the basics, I replied. She hummed a tune I didn't recognize, moving with impossible grace over a fallen log that I had to carefully step over. She seemed to float across it, her feet barely touching the rotted wood. How long have you been lost out here? I asked, trying to regain some control of the conversation. Lost, she repeated, as if the concept was foreign to her. I'm exactly where I need to be. As we continued walking, she asked more questions. What time I woke each morning, whether I locked the tower door at night, if I received many visitors. Each question seemed innocent enough on its own, but together, they formed a disturbing pattern of interest in my isolation and routine. The trees began to thin, and soon I could see the metal structure of my lookout tower rising above the tree line. Normally, the sight filled me with a sense of purpose and security. Today, with this strange woman following behind me, it just reminded me how alone I really was out here. We reached the clearing around the base of my tower. The metal stairs spiraled upward 70 feet to my small living quarters above. I turned to Sage, intending to radio for assistance before bringing her up. I'll need to call this in, I said, gesturing to the tower. You can wait here and I'll... Oh, she interrupted, her face falling into an expression of concern that didn't match the calm in her eyes. I'm afraid of heights. Terrible fear. Couldn't we call from down here? I looked at her closely. There was no tension in her body, no increased breathing, none of the typical signs of someone with a genuine fear, just that same placid, empty smile and those two intense eyes. The radio is upstairs, I said firmly. And it's been spotty today. I need to use the main set. Then I'll come with you, Carter Oliver. She moved toward the stairs before I could respond. I'll manage my fear. And in that moment, watching her glide toward my tower, with perfect confidence that completely contradicted her claimed fear of heights, real fear began to rise in me. The strange barefoot woman who knew my name, knew about Anna, knew too much about me, had somehow maneuvered me into bringing her directly to my isolated tower. I had followed her footprints thinking I was the tracker, but with growing certainty, I realized I had been the one led all along. I eased the door shut behind us and kept my voice low as I reached for my radio, never taking my eyes off Sage. She moved around my small living space like she'd been here before, running her fingers along my bookshelf, examining my coffee mug, touching everything. Ranger Fleming, this is Whiteridge Lookout. I have a situation up here. Found a woman in the forest, says her name is Sage. Need advice on protocol. I held the radio close to my mouth, watching as Sage picked up the framed photo of Anna that I'd stupidly left on my desk. Put that down, please. I tried to sound casual. She smiled without looking at me, her fingers tracing Anna's face through the glass. She left you, didn't she? I can tell from the way you don't want me touching this. The radio crackled. Carter? Repeat your last. Did you say Sage? Fleming's voice came through sharper than usual. Found her about 2 miles east of the tower. No supplies, seemed lost. Sage drifted toward my small kitchenette, opening cabinets with the casual confidence of someone who lived here. Fleming's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Listen carefully. Do not engage with her. Do not offer her anything. Keep your distance until I get there. I'm 10 minutes out. Copy that, I said, confusion mixing with the unease that had been building since I first spotted her. She asked for water. Should I? No, Fleming cut me off. Don't give her anything. I'm on my way. I set the radio down, noticing how Sage had gone completely still, her back to me as she stood at my kitchen counter. Your friend sounds worried, she said, her voice light, but different somehow. May I have something to drink? Something sweet, perhaps. I'd prefer that to water. I don't have anything sweet, I said, remembering Fleming's warning. Just water and coffee. Sage turned slowly. The pleasant lost hiker from the forest was gone. Her face had hardened into something ancient and knowing, her smile tight and humorless. You're lying to me, Carter Oliver, she said, using my full name for the second time. Everyone has something sweet. Sugar for coffee, honey for tea, syrup for pancakes. She took a step toward me. You know why I'm here, don't you, Carter Oliver? I backed up against my desk. Look, my supervisor is coming. He can help get you back to wherever you need to go. She didn't acknowledge my words. Her fingers trailed along the wooden walls as she moved, and I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. Where her fingertips touched, the wood darkened, tiny wisps of smoke rising from perfectly formed scorch marks. What the hell, I whispered. The room heated up quickly, and I started sweating. Sage stopped in front of me, and I watched in horror as her eyes changed. The green irises expanded and darkened to black, swallowing the whites until her eyes were just two empty pits. Where are the children, Carter Oliver? She asked, her voice layered now with other voices beneath it. You watch these woods. You must know where they hide. I pressed back against my desk, completely lost. What children? There aren't any children in these woods. Liar, she screamed, the word exploding from her with such force that the windows rattled. The door burst open with a crash that made me jump. Ranger Fleming stood there, rifle raised, aiming directly at Sage's head. Step away from him, Fleming ordered, his face a mask of controlled fury I'd never seen before. Sage didn't move, didn't even turn around. Stephen Fleming, she said with a sigh that sounded almost fond. You've gotten old. And you haven't changed a bit, Daisy. Or is it Lily now? Fleming's voice carried decades of hatred. She laughed, the sound beautiful and terrible at once. It's Sage now, Stephen. You know how the seasons change me. She finally turned to face him. Have you told your young watcher what happened to all the others? I watched in horror as her skin began to ripple, like something underneath was trying to get out. Her fingers stretched, elongating impossibly, darkening to the color of bark, branching into twig-like appendages. Carter, run! Fleming shouted, never taking his eyes off Sage. Ranger Station 6, go now! My legs finally caught up with my brain. I bolted for the door, slipping past Fleming as he stepped into the room. You can't have him too, I heard Fleming say as I reached the stairs. The first gunshot rang out as I hit the third step down. An inhuman shriek followed, a sound no human throat could make. I took the stairs 3 at a time, nearly falling twice. More gunshots echoed above me, punctuated by crashes and that terrible screaming. I burst out of the tower into the sunlight. Smoke rose from the windows of my lookout. The smell of burning wood filled the air as I ran for Fleming's truck, the keys still in the ignition where he'd left them. More inhuman shrieks pierced the air as I jumped into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into drive, tires spinning in dirt before catching. As I sped down the access road, I glanced in the rearview mirror once. My tower was burning, smoke rising into the sky. The home I'd made for myself after Anna left, now just another thing being taken away. I gripped the steering wheel of Fleming's truck so hard, my knuckles turned white, my hands shaking as I sped down the narrow forest road. Each curve sent me sliding against the seatbelt, the tires kicking up dust and gravel. In the rearview mirror, black smoke poured from my lookout tower, flames licking up the wooden sides of the only home I'd known since Anna left. The radio under the dash crackled. I reached for it, keeping my eyes on the road. "This is Carter Oliver, White Ridge Lookout," I said, my voice barely steady. "I need help. My tower it's burning." More static, then a male voice cut through. "This is Ranger Station 6. What's your situation?" "Over. I'm headed your way in Ranger Fleming's vehicle." There was. I paused, unsure how to explain what had happened. There was a woman. She attacked Fleming. The tower's on fire. A brief silence followed. "Carter, did Fleming give you any specific instructions? Any code words?" I thought back to what Fleming had shouted as I ran down the stairs. "He said to tell you code, Ash. That's all." The voice on the other end changed immediately, becoming more urgent. "Understood. Code Ash confirmed. Continue to Ranger Station 6 immediately. Do not stop for anyone. I repeat, do not stop for anyone." "What's code, Ash? What's happening?" I asked, taking a sharp turn too fast. "Just get here now." The radio went silent. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my mind racing. How had Sage known my name? What was that thing she turned into? And Fleming, was he even alive? The forest blurred past on either side of the road. I couldn't shake the image of Sage's eyes turning black, her fingers stretching into branch-like claws, the way the wood scorched beneath her touch, the heat that had filled the room. 20 minutes later, I spotted the ranger station ahead, a low concrete building surrounded by a chain-link fence. I skidded into the parking area and slammed the brakes, the truck sliding slightly on the gravel. Before I could even get out, the station door burst open, and a man in a Forest Service uniform rushed toward me. "Carter Oliver?" he asked, his hand resting on his sidearm. I nodded, stepping out of the truck on wobbly legs. "Jerome Padilla," he said, not offering his hand. "Inside now." I followed him through the door into a reception area, then through another door, marked Authorized Personnel, only into a security office. The walls were bare concrete, with a small reinforced opening high on one wall. A bank of monitors showed various angles of the station's exterior and the surrounding forest. "Sit down," Padilla said, pointing to a metal chair next to a desk covered in papers and radio equipment. I didn't sit. "Fleming's still out there. We need to." "Fleming knows what he's doing." Padilla cut me off. "If anyone can handle this, he can. Now, tell me exactly what happened." I paced the small office instead, stopping occasionally to look through the high window, where I could just make out a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. My tower still burning. I found footprints around my tower this morning. Small, barefoot. I followed them and found a woman in a white dress who called herself Sage. She seemed lost. So I brought her back to the tower to call for help. The words tumbled out faster than I could think them through. She knew things she shouldn't know. About me. About Fleming. Her eyes changed. Her hands. They weren't human. Fleming showed up with a rifle and told me to run. Padilla listened without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. "What was she?" I asked when I'd finished. He turned to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder, and placed it on the desk without opening it. "We call her the Widow of White Ridge. She's been appearing in these woods for over 100 years. I stared at him. "What? You need to understand something, Oliver. The Forest Service does more than watch for fires. In some locations, we monitor other threats too. I moved to the window again, watching the smoke. This isn't making any sense. It will, Padilla said. But right now we wait for Fleming. The next 3 hours crawled by. I couldn't sit still, pacing the concrete floor until my legs ached. Padilla made calls, filled out forms, and kept checking the monitors. Every so often, he tried to reach Fleming on the radio, but got nothing back. My mind kept returning to Sage's face, how normal she'd looked at, first standing in that forest clearing, and how quickly she transformed into something else entirely. The way she'd asked about children, the way Fleming had recognized her immediately. How many others? I finally asked. How many other lookouts know about this? Padilla glanced up from his paperwork. Need-to-know basis. You weren't supposed to know. Well, I know now, I said, and I almost died because nobody told me. He nodded slowly. That's on us. On Fleming, mostly. He should have briefed you. When the door swung open, Fleming stood in the doorway, his uniform torn and bloody, a deep gash running across his forehead. His face was pale beneath streaks of soot, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion. She's gone for now, he said, his voice hoarse, as he collapsed into a chair across from Padilla. Blood had dried along his jawline, and his hands were blistered with what looked like burn marks. Jesus, I breathed. What happened up there? Fleming closed his eyes for a moment. She wasn't happy about losing you. Burned half the tower before I got her out. I led her deeper into the forest, away from the road. You need medical attention, Padilla said, already reaching for a first aid kit on the wall. In a minute. Fleming waved him off. Oliver needs to know what he's dealing with. I stood with my back against the wall, watching Fleming dab at the cut on his forehead with a tissue. The widow of Whiteridge, I said. That's what Padilla called her. Fleming nodded. That's one name. She has others. What is she? Something that should have moved on long ago. Fleming winced as Padilla cleaned his wound with antiseptic. Back in 1923, there was a lumber camp near what's now the East Ridge Trail. The loggers found a small Nishka settlement. There was a dispute over land boundaries. Fleming's voice dropped lower. It ended badly. 37 children disappeared into the forest during the violence. Some people say they were murdered. Others claim they just vanished. What does this have to do with her? I asked, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. A woman was seen running into the forest after the children. The loggers found her body 2 days later at the base of a lightning-struck pine. But that wasn't the end of her. Fleming looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. She came back, first as whispers among the trees, then as sightings of a woman in white, always asking the same questions. About the children, about sweetness. Padilla handed Fleming a glass of water, which he drank in one long swallow. Over time, the stories became more consistent, Fleming said. She appears in a pattern, changing with the seasons. Lily in winter, daisy in spring, rose in summer, sage in fall. I felt a chill run through me. But she called herself Sage. It's summer. Fleming and Padilla exchanged a look. That's what worries us, Padilla said. Her patterns are changing. She's appeared earlier than usual this year. The logging operation near the old burial grounds probably triggered it, Fleming added. I tried to stop it, but he cut himself off with a grimace of pain as Padilla applied a butterfly bandage to his forehead. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. This is insane. You're telling me some ghost or whatever is haunting the forest. Call it what you want, Fleming said. Spirit, echo, memory. She's real enough to kill. The word hung in the air between us. Kill. I thought of the gunshots I'd heard as I fled down the tower stairs, the inhuman shriek that followed. Has she before? I couldn't finish the question. Fleming nodded slowly. Not everyone gets away. She targets the watchers, specifically. Fire lookouts, rangers on patrol, anyone who observes the forest from a high place. Padilla pulled a folder from the desk and slid a photograph across to me. It showed a Forest Service ID card for a man with short black hair and a neat beard. Tyler Bowen, Lookout Station 7. Tyler radioed in a Kodash 3 weeks ago, Padilla said quietly. We haven't found him yet. I stared at the photo, remembering the Western novel I'd found on the shelf in my tower. The previous lookout had left it there. Tyler had left it there. Why the hell didn't you warn me? I demanded, anger cutting through my fear. If you knew this was happening, why put anyone in those towers at all? Fleming pressed his palms against his eyes. The towers need to be manned. Fires don't stop because we have other problems. And she doesn't come every year. We thought we had more time before she showed up this season. Tyler was the first sign something was wrong. And you just put me up in that tower anyway? I stood up, my hands balled into fists. Jesus Christ, Fleming. You were supposed to be safe, Fleming said. You were outside her usual hunting grounds. Well, clearly I wasn't, I shouted. Padilla stepped between us. What matters now is keeping you safe. She's fixated on you for some reason. What reason? I asked. What does she want from me? The same thing she wants from all of us, Fleming said. She thinks we know where the children are. She thinks we're hiding them. I remembered her words in the tower. Where are they? Where are my children? The way her rage had physically transformed her, burning the wood beneath her fingers. So, I'm what? Bait? Target? My voice cracked. What happens now? Now we move you somewhere safe, Padilla said. Away from the forest. She rarely ventures into populated areas. Fleming nodded in agreement. And we try to figure out why her pattern is changing. Why she's appearing as Sage in summer instead of Rose. I looked between them, the reality of my situation sinking in. My tower was gone. My job was gone. And some vengeful forest entity thought I was hiding children from her. Children who had disappeared a century ago. This can't be happening, I whispered. It's been happening for 100 years, Fleming replied. You just didn't know about it until today. I thought of how comfortable I'd felt in that tower, how the forest had seemed like a sanctuary after my divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd escaped to the woods to avoid people, only to find something far worse than human drama waiting for me. I ran from one life just to stumble into this nightmare, I said. More to myself than to them. That's why she chose you, Fleming said quietly. The widow targets people who are already lost in some way. People watching and waiting. People like us. The smell hit me first, that sickly sweet decay that no forest animal produces. The search party had fanned out through the pines, calling Tyler Bowen's name into the green shadows for nearly an hour before someone shouted. I wasn't supposed to be there. Fleming had argued against it, but I'd insisted. I needed to see. I followed Fleming through the underbrush toward the cluster of rangers, gathering beneath an ancient pine. The trunk was massive, roots bulging from the earth like veins. As I got closer, I saw what they'd found. Tyler Bowen looked like a museum exhibit. A mummy propped against the tree trunk, skin pulled tight over bone, eyes sunken into dark hollows, his mouth hung open in a silent scream. His Forest Service uniform was intact, but hung from his frame like clothes on a scarecrow. What caught my eye, though, were his hands. They were curled around several torn packets of sugar, the kind you'd get at a diner. Clutched to his chest like precious gems. Sheriff Hamilton crouched beside the body, her ash-blonde hair tucked beneath her hat. She looked up as we approached, her gray eyes sharp and observant. Same as the others, she said to Fleming. Not to me. Completely drained, Fleming nodded grimly. The sugar packets. From his supplies, I'd guess, Hamilton finished. not enough to satisfy her. I tried to process what I was seeing. Tyler had been stationed at Lookout 7, about 12 miles from my tower. I'd spoken to him a few times on the radio. Weather updates, smoke reports, normal things. Now he was this husk. "Carter," Fleming said, his voice pulling me back. "You've seen enough. Let's go." I couldn't argue. As the coroner's team moved in, I backed away, unable to tear my eyes from those sugar packets. So Fleming had been right. The widow hadn't just killed Tyler. She drained his life, his essence, because he couldn't provide what she wanted. Something sweet. The Pine Breeze Motel in Pinecrest had faded curtains, lumpy mattresses, and grimy carpet. But it was 30 miles from White Ridge Forest. Sheriff Hamilton drove me here 3 days ago after we found Tyler. I watched the trees thin out through the rear window of her cruiser, feeling relief and unease as the forest disappeared. "Deputy Ellis will be stationed outside your door at night," she'd explained as she walked me to room 14. "During the day, we'll have regular patrols. No one gets to you without going through us first." I appreciated her confidence, but I'd seen what happened to my tower, to Fleming, to Tyler. I wasn't sure a deputy with a standard issue pistol would make much difference if Sage decided to pay me a visit. Night 3 at the motel, and I still couldn't sleep. I lay on my back, listening to the building creak and the wind rustle through the pines in the parking lot. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:42. I'd been staring at it since 1:15. A soft knock at the door made me bolt upright. "Oliver, it's me." Fleming's voice called through the door. I got up, checked the peephole, and let him in. Fleming looked worse than I felt. The burns on his hands were bandaged, and the gash on his forehead had been stitched. Dark circles hung under his eyes. "Sorry about the hour," he said, carrying a cardboard box past me and setting it on the small table by the window. "Thought you might be awake anyway." "What's all that?" I asked. "History." Fleming opened the box and pulled out several file folders, a leather-bound journal, and what looked like old newspaper clippings. "Everything we've got on the widow of White Ridge, going back to 1923. I took a seat across from him as he spread out the materials. The journal was worn, its pages yellowed, the handwriting inside faded but still readable. "Ranger Billy Montgomery," Fleming explained. "He was there when it happened. The Nishka lumber camp massacre. He documented everything, including the first appearances of the woman we know as Sage." I picked up one of the newspaper clippings. The headline read, "Tragedy at Nishka camp. 37 children missing, presumed dead." "She follows the same pattern," Fleming continued, pulling out more documents. "Every single appearance over 100 years. First, she asks for something sweet. Then she asks about her children. Then," he trailed off, "she burns everything." I finished. Fleming nodded. "But here's the thing. We've had survivors, not many but some." He pushed forward what looked like a typed statement. "Matthew Collins, 1952, forest surveyor. She appeared to him near what used to be the Nishka camp. Asked him for something sweet. He happened to have a jar of honey in his pack. He used to put it in his tea, and that worked. The honey bought him time, enough to get away while she was distracted." Fleming pulled out more statements. "Same with Peter Hargrove in 1978. Had maple syrup in his lunch pail. Janet Wilson in 1985 had hard candies." I glanced toward my nightstand, where I'd placed a small container of honey purchased from the gas station across the street. Fleming followed my gaze and gave a small nod of approval. "Smart, but just remember, it's only a temporary solution. Buys time, nothing more." "Why is she fixated on me?" I asked the question that had been haunting me since I'd fled my burning tower. Fleming leaned back, running a hand through his gray hair. "You're a watcher. That's what she called you, right?" the watcher on the hill. She believes people who observe the forest might know where her children are. I remembered the scorch marks her fingers had left on my tower walls, the way the temperature had risen when her eyes went black, the way she'd screamed, "Liar," when I'd said I didn't know about any children. Fleming continued sorting through the documents, pulling out a map marked with red X's. Each X is a confirmed sighting or attack. See the pattern? They all radiate outward from the old Nishka camp. Except now she's changing her pattern, I noted, remembering our previous conversation. Yes, and I think I know why. Fleming unfolded a larger, more recent map. Sanderson Lumber got approval for a new cutting operation 3 months ago. Right here, he pointed to an area marked in blue. It borders what we believe are old Nishka burial grounds. I studied the map, the pieces clicking into place. So the increased logging activity near these burial grounds is disturbing something, maybe awakening memories, making her more aggressive in her search. Fleming gathered the documents back into neat piles. Carter, I need you to understand something. She's not just killing randomly. She's looking for those children, methodically searching every corner of White Ridge Forest and beyond. And for whatever reason, she now believes you have knowledge that can help her. I thought of Tyler's desiccated body, how desperate his final moments must have been. The sugar packets hadn't been enough. What would happen when the honey beside my bed wasn't enough either? There's got to be a rational explanation, I said, more to convince myself than Fleming. Some person, some group, something behind all this. Fleming gave me a long look. I've been telling myself that for 30 years, Carter. But you saw her. You saw what she did to your tower. To me. He held up his bandaged hands. Some things just don't fit into our neat, rational boxes. As Fleming repacked the documents, I looked out the window at the parking lot, searching for a white dress or copper hair. Each day pulled me further from the logical world I knew. A world where dead women didn't appear in forests, asking for sweetness in children. A world where people didn't lose their lives for failing to answer impossible questions. That world was slipping away from me. One sleepless night at a time, I woke up, gasping. The smell hitting me before I could even open my eyes. Pine needles, burning wood. The scents filled my motel room like they belonged there, as if the walls of the pine breeze had dissolved and I was back in the forest again. My hand shot to the bedside lamp. The room looked normal, same worn carpet, same cheap particle board dresser, but the smell was so strong I could taste it. Something pulled my attention to the window. I got up, my bare feet cold against the floor, and yanked back the thin curtain. She stood in the center of the parking lot, looking up at my second-floor room. Sage. Her white dress hung perfectly still, despite the night breeze that rustled through the nearby trees. Her copper-red hair caught the moonlight, making it look almost alive around her pale face. As I watched, she raised one hand in a gesture that might have been friendly if it wasn't coming from her, a greeting. Like we were old neighbors who happened to spot each other. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. My elbow hit the nightstand, knocking over a half-empty glass of water. The crash seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. I grabbed my phone and called Fleming's number with shaking fingers. When he answered, his voice was instantly alert despite the hour. "She's here," was all I managed to say. "Where?" "At the motel. Standing in the parking lot, looking right at my room. Don't move. Don't talk to her. I'm calling Sheriff Williams now." Within 20 minutes, the motel was in chaos. Sheriff Williams arrived with 4 deputies, followed closely by Fleming in his truck. The night manager moved through the building, knocking on doors and telling guests to evacuate due to a situation. I watched from my window as bleary-eyed travelers in pajamas and hastily thrown-on clothes were escorted to their vehicles. A young couple argued with a deputy about getting their bags. An older man in a bathrobe refused to leave without his medication. Through it all, Sage remained motionless in the center of the parking lot, her gaze fixed on my window. "We need to get you out of here," Fleming said, appearing at my door with Sheriff Williams. Now, I had nothing to pack except the clothes Fleming had brought me days earlier. I stuffed them into a plastic shopping bag while Sheriff Williams kept watch at the door. "What happens when we go outside?" I asked. "We've got cars positioned to block direct sight lines to her," Williams explained. "Deputies will cover your exit. Move fast. Keep your head down." "Has she done anything?" "Just standing there," Fleming said, his bandaged hands fidgeting at his sides. "But that's more than enough." The hallway was empty as we headed to the back stairwell. It felt like Sage had already scared everyone away but us. Deputies lined the path between the stairwell and Fleming's truck, hands on their holstered weapons. I kept my eyes down as instructed, but I could feel her watching me. Her gaze pressed against the back of my neck. "Get in," Fleming said, opening the passenger door of his truck. "We're heading to the station." As I climbed in, I made the mistake of looking up. Through a gap between two deputies, I caught a glimpse of her. She wasn't smiling, wasn't frowning, just watching with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I slammed the door shut. We spent the rest of the night at the ranger station, drinking coffee that tasted like burned plastic and waiting for updates from Sheriff Williams. Around 4 in the morning, a deputy radioed in. The woman in white was gone. "Just like that?" I asked. Fleming shrugged. "She comes and goes. Always has." When dawn broke, we drove back to the motel. The parking lot was cordoned off with yellow police tape, and several deputies were taking photos. As we got closer, I saw what they were documenting. Pine saplings, dozens of them, breaking through the asphalt like it was nothing more than a thin crust of dirt. Some were already knee-high, their needles vibrant green against the dull gray of the parking lot. "That's impossible," I said, staring at the trees. "They can't grow that fast, through pavement." Fleming's face was grim. "She's fixated on you now," he said, not looking at me. "This is a message." "What kind of message?" "That she can find you anywhere, that she won't stop." Sheriff Williams joined us, looking tired. "I've never seen anything like this in 30 years on the job." "What do we tell people?" I asked. "Gas leak," Williams said. "Evacuation was precautionary. The environmental team is looking into unusual plant growth linked to chemical seepage." Fleming nodded. "It'll work for now, but Carter can't stay here anymore." They talked about me as if I wasn't there. Williams said I needed to leave right away. Fleming brought up Seattle, far enough to be safe, but close enough if they needed me. "I have a sister there," I said, the words coming out before I'd fully processed the thought. "Mariah. I could stay with her for a while." Fleming looked relieved. "Call her now. I'll arrange transport." The bus station was small and nearly empty when we arrived later that morning. Fleming handed me an envelope full of cash, a new prepaid phone, and a single jar of honey. "Just in case," he said, nodding at the honey. "Keep it with you always." I tucked it into my bag next to the toothbrush and change of clothes he'd bought for me at the gas station mini-mart. "How long do I need to stay away?" "Until we figure out what she wants, until she stops looking for you." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'll call you when I know more." The bus was old, with cracked leather seats and windows that rattled as we pulled out of the station. I watched White Ridge shrink behind us, the forest rising like a green wall against the horizon. I felt a strange mix of emotions, overwhelming relief to be leaving, but also an unexpected pull, as if the forest didn't want to let me go. as the bus rounded a bend, taking White Ridge out of sight. I could have sworn I saw a flash of white among the distant trees, a figure standing at the forest's edge, watching the bus drive away. The journey to Seattle took most of the day. I dozed off several times, jerking awake at every stop, half expecting to see Sage boarding the bus. By late afternoon, the landscape had transformed from forests and small towns to suburbs. And finally, the city itself. Mariah was waiting at the station, worry etched across her face. She looked like our mother, same dark hair, same way of standing with her arms crossed when she was concerned. "Carter," she said, pulling me into a hug. "What happened? You sounded terrible on the phone." "It's a long story," I said, which wasn't a lie. She drove us to her house in West Seattle, filling the car with cheerful chatter about her husband Rob and the kids, asking few questions about my situation. I was grateful for that. What could I say? That I was running from a supernatural entity who had been terrorizing the woods for 100 years. "The guest room's all set up," she said, as we pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house. "Rob's making lasagna. The kids are excited to see Uncle Carter." I managed to smile. "Thanks for taking me in. What are sisters for?" She paused, her hand on the ignition. "Look, I don't know what happened up there, but you're safe here." "Okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The inside of Mariah's house was warm and cluttered, in the way family homes often are. Kids' toys scattered across the living room floor. Mail piled on the counter, family photos crowding every available surface. Her husband Rob greeted me with a firm handshake and a beer, while my niece Emma and nephew Jake bombarded me with questions about living in a fire tower. "Did you see any bears?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "A few from a distance," I said, leaving out the more recent horrors I'd witnessed. "Mom says your house burned down," Emma said. "That's why you're staying with us." I glanced at Mariah, who shrugged apologetically. "That's the simple version, yeah." It was the story we'd agreed on over the phone, that my lookout tower had caught fire, and I needed a place to stay while figuring out what was next. It was close enough to the truth without including the supernatural elements that would make me sound insane. Dinner was noisy and normal. Exactly what I needed. Rob talked about his job at the software company. The kids argued about who would get the last piece of garlic bread. And Mariah kept refilling my wine glass with a knowing look. For brief moments, I almost forgot about Sage. Almost. Throughout the evening, I found myself drawn to the windows, my eyes scanning the small park across the street. The tree line there was nothing like the dense forest of White Ridge, just a few maples and one large pine. But I couldn't stop checking it for movement, for a flash of white. "You okay?" Mariah asked, catching me staring out the window for the third time while helping with dishes. "Yeah, just adjusting." She nodded, pushing further. "It'll take time." That night, lying in Mariah's guest room, I felt both safer and more exposed than I had in weeks. Concrete and civilization separated me from the forest, but so did miles of open space that Sage could cross if she wanted to find me again. Within a week, I found a job as a night security guard at an office building downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me, trading one watching job for another, but the overnight shift suited me. I wasn't sleeping well anyway, and the quiet hours alone gave me time to process everything that had happened. I'd sit at the security desk, monitors showing empty hallways and darkened offices, and find myself falling into the same watchful rhythm I'd had at the tower. Every shadow made me tense. Every unexpected noise sent my heart racing. Fleming called once a month as promised, his updates brief but reassuring. "No new sightings in 6 weeks, he reported in late September. "The area around your old tower is quiet, "What about the saplings at the motel?" I asked. "Still there, growing like normal trees now." "That's not normal, Fleming," he sighed. "Normal for our situation, then." As autumn settled over Seattle, bringing rain and early darkness, I established a routine that should have felt secure. Work at night, sleep during the day, dinner with Mariah's family a few times a week. I kept honey in my bedroom, in my bathroom, in my locker at work, just in case. But the forest followed me. I'd wake up convinced. I smelled pine in my bedroom. The scent so vivid I'd get up to check if someone had brought a Christmas tree into the house months early. In the office building at night, I'd turn a corner and catch a whiff of wood smoke, though the building was all electric. "It's just your brain playing tricks," Mariah said when I mentioned it. "Careful not to sound too concerned. Trauma can do that." She was right. Trauma made more sense than a forest spirit following me to Seattle. But during my shifts, watching empty corridors on security monitors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that I was still being hunted, that somewhere Sage was still looking for her children. Still convinced I knew where they were, still waiting for the right moment to ask me again. And when she did, I had no idea what I would tell her. October had settled over Seattle like a damp blanket, bringing with it a chill that crept through my jacket as I walked from the bus stop to my sister's house. I'd been living with Mariah for nearly 2 months now, and I'd established what should have been a comfortable routine. Wake up at noon, research on my laptop until dinner, then head downtown for my night shift as a security guard at the Westlake Tower. It should have felt safe, miles away from White Ridge Forest, surrounded by concrete and glass instead of ancient pines. But it didn't. My nights patrolling the office building reminded me of my time as a fire lookout. The quiet and isolation were familiar. Instead of watching for smoke, I scanned the spaces between buildings and the dark corners of parks, searching for a flash of white dress or copper-red hair. I caught myself doing it again as I unlocked the door to Mariah's house, my eyes drawn to the small park across the street, where a group of children played on the swings. No white dress, no woman standing too still among the trees, just ordinary life continuing as if my world hadn't been turned inside out. "Carter, is that you?" Mariah called from the kitchen. "Yeah," I answered, hanging my jacket on the hook by the door. I slipped my hand into the jacket pocket first, making sure the small jar of honey was still there before I left it. Mariah appeared in the doorway. Drying her hands on a dish towel, her eyes followed my movement, noticing the check of the honey jar, a habit I couldn't break. "I made chili," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Jason's taking the kids to soccer practice, so it's just us for dinner." I nodded and followed her to the kitchen, where I took my usual seat at the table. The window behind me faced the backyard, and I'd positioned the chair so I could see both the door and most of the room. Another habit Mariah had noticed, but hadn't commented on directly. She ladled chili into 2 bowls and set one in front of me. "Pete called today. They're going camping this weekend at Lake Wenatchee. Asked if we wanted to join them." I focused on my food, stirring it slowly. "I can't. I picked up an extra shift." "You don't have to work every weekend, Carter." She sat across from me, concern on her face. "Getting out into nature might be good for you." I almost laughed at that. Nature was exactly what I was avoiding. "Maybe next time," I lied. Mariah sighed and changed the subject, telling me about her day teaching 3rd graders. I tried to listen, to be present. But my mind kept drifting. It had been 3 days since Fleming's last call. His updates had grown less frequent as winter approached. "No new sightings," he'd reported last time. "Lumber activity shut down for the season. Things are quiet." I should have felt relief. Instead, I found myself digging into what happened at the Nishka lumber camp years ago. The massacre that created the widow, created Sage. What happened to those 37 children who disappeared into the forest? Official reports said they ran from the violence and got lost, eventually dying in the wilderness. But if that were true, why was Sage still searching for them after nearly 100 years? Carter? Mariah's voice pulled me back to the present. You're doing it again. Sorry, just tired. I took a bite of chili that I couldn't taste. You have honey in the bathroom cabinet now, she said quietly. I found it when I was looking for aspirin. I set down my spoon. I know it sounds crazy. You never told me what happened up there. Not really. She reached across the table, stopping short of touching my hand. The fire at the lookout tower. There's more to it, isn't there? Maria, please. I pushed away from the table. I need to get ready for work. She didn't try to stop me as I left the kitchen, both of us knowing I had hours before my shift started, in the guest bedroom that had become mine. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard like I'd been running. My laptop sat open on the small desk, displaying newspaper archives from 1923, black and white photos of grim-faced rangers and loggers standing in front of the charred remains of the Nishka camp. I'd read every article, every report I could find, searching for something, though I wasn't sure what. I crossed to the window, sliding it open to let in the cool air. My small balcony overlooked the street 17 floors below. The city spread out beyond, a maze of buildings and lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening. So different from the dark canopy of trees I'd watched over. That's when I saw them, barefoot prints, in the thin layer of dust on my balcony floor, small like a woman's or a child's. They started at the edge of the railing and stopped at my window, as if someone had stepped off thin air onto my balcony, then walked to my window and what? Looked inside. Waited? I crouched down, my finger hovering over one perfect print. Impossible. No one could access this balcony from outside. No one could step from empty air 17 floors up. Yet the prints were undeniably there. I stood quickly scanning the cityscape, searching rooftops and windows for any sign of watching eyes, finding nothing but the indifferent faces of neighboring buildings. I should call Fleming, report this. But something held me back. The same instinct that had made me follow those first footprints into the forest. I closed the window and locked it, drawing the curtains tight. That night, I sat at the security desk of the Westlake Tower, eyes fixed on the bank of monitors, showing empty hallways, the silent parking garage, the darkened lobby. The building had cleared out hours ago, leaving only the cleaning crew on the upper floors, and me watching. I tried to focus on the monitors, but my mind kept drifting back to the footprints on my balcony. What did they mean? Was Sage watching me? Following me to Seattle? I should have been scared, but instead, I felt a pull towards something I couldn't see. A figure in white crossed the lobby, walking toward the elevators. I leaned forward, heart racing, eyes glued to the screen. A woman in a white dress, her copper hair visible in the grainy footage. I jumped out of my chair and ran for the stairs. Protocol said to call it in, but I couldn't explain this over the radio. The lobby was 5 floors down. I took the stairs 2 at a time and burst through the door into the marble-floored space, my footsteps echoing. No one was there. I stood still, catching my breath, scanning the silent lobby. The elevators were all accounted for, their floor indicators showing they hadn't moved. No doors had opened to the outside. The security system would have recorded it. I noticed the wet footprints on the marble floor. Small, bare feet, just like the ones on my balcony. They led from the main entrance to the elevators, and then stopped, as if their owner had vanished. I followed them, crouching to examine the last prints. They were already beginning to evaporate in the climate-controlled air. I reached out, touching one with my fingertips. The liquid was clear, but it didn't feel like water. It smelled of pine sap and earth. I returned to my desk, my eyes constantly flicking to monitor 3, but the lobby remained empty for the rest of my shift. When my replacement arrived at 6 in the morning, I said nothing about what I'd seen. The dream started that night. Children ran through burning forests, their screams mixed with the roar of flames. A woman's voice called their names: Emma, Thomas, Sarah. I had never heard those names before, yet in the dream they felt like my own children. In the dream, I was searching too, pushing through smoke and heat, calling out to them. "I'm here, I'll help you." But they never answered, and I never found them. I woke gasping, my sheets tangled around my legs, my body drenched in sweat. The room was dark, but something felt wrong. I reached for the lamp, my fingers fumbling with the switch. Light flooded the room, and I saw them scattered across my bed. Pine needles, dozens of them, fresh and green, their sharp scent filling the air. I jumped up, checking the window, still locked, exactly as I'd left it. The door to my room was closed. There was no way these needles could have gotten here. Yet they had. I gathered them in my hands. These impossible fragments of the forest that had somehow found their way into my urban sanctuary. They felt real, not dreamlike at all, pricking my skin as I collected them. Standing in the center of my room, pine needles in my palms, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but now there was something else. Understanding maybe, or the start of it. "I know you're watching," I whispered to my empty apartment. "What do you want me to see?" The package arrived on a Tuesday morning. A plain brown cardboard box sitting on Mariah's doorstep, with only my name written across the top in black marker. No return address, no postage marks, nothing to indicate where it had come from or who had delivered it. I picked it up, surprised by its weight, and brought it inside. I set it on the kitchen table and cut through the packing tape with a knife from the drawer. The cardboard flaps opened to reveal several leather-bound journals, nestled in crumpled newspaper. They looked old, the covers worn at the corners, the pages yellowed and rippled with age. A folded note rested on top. I opened the note and recognized Jerome Padilla's handwriting immediately. "Carter, found these locked away in a storage room at Station 6 while cleaning up after that mess with the tower. They belong to Ranger Billy Fisher, dated 1923. Thought you should see them, especially given recent events. Be careful, Jerome." I lifted the first journal out of the box, running my fingers over the cracked leather cover. The date 1923 was stamped in faded gold lettering on the spine. I opened to the first page, where neat, precise handwriting filled the lined paper. January 12th, 1923. First day at White Ridge Station. The forests here feel different from my last posting. Older, somehow more aware. I spent the rest of the day reading, barely moving from the kitchen table. Mariah came home, asked about the package, but I gave her vague answers. Something about research materials for a writing project. She didn't press, but I caught her worried glances as I remained fixed in place, turning page after page of Billy Fisher's journals. Days passed, and I couldn't tear myself away from Fisher's accounts. I called in sick to my security job. I stayed up until dawn reading, then slept fitfully for a few hours before returning to the journals. Mariah brought me food that I barely touched. The world outside the pages of these journals seemed less real than the one Fisher described. What I found in those pages contradicted everything Fleming had told me. According to Fleming, the widow of White Ridge, Sage, was a vengeful spirit seeking retribution for the massacre at the lumber camp. But Fisher's journals told a different story entirely. April 3rd made contact again with the woman in white near the eastern ridge. One entry read, "She approached but did not threaten, asked about children, not in anger, but in desperation. 37 children from the camp fled into the forest during the violence. None have been recovered despite 3 weeks of searching. The woman believes they are still alive somewhere in these woods." I flipped through more pages, finding detailed maps of search areas, lists of the missing children's names, and notes on the strange occurrences that had begun to plague the forest. May 10th, Henderson quit today. Claims he heard children singing in the trees when he was alone on the North Trail. Says the woman in white appeared and reached for him, but she wasn't attacking, she was pleading. I believe him. The more I read, the clearer it became. Sage wasn't seeking revenge. She was searching desperately, frantically searching for 37 children who had vanished into the forest during the massacre. I pulled out a notepad and began making my own notes, correlating Fisher's accounts with what I knew from my time in the lookout tower. The pattern of appearances, the fixation on high places like the tower. It made sense if she was searching. Watchers could see farther, could help locate what was lost. June 22nd, Fisher wrote, "Another encounter with her today. She became agitated when Roberts threatened her with his rifle. She burned a small clearing, but I noticed she never harmed him, even when she could. Her violence seems defensive or a sign of frustration. She is not malevolent. She is grieving." The most compelling entries came in late summer when Fisher began developing his own theories about the missing children. August 15th. I believe I understand what's happening. The children who fled into the forest that night never came out. Not because they died, but because they've been changed by the same forces that maintain the widow's existence. The forest has taken them in some way I cannot yet comprehend. Their bodies may be gone, but something of them remains bound to these woods. Fisher's handwriting grew more frantic in these later entries, his typically neat script becoming hurried and slanted across the page. September 2nd, left offerings today at the stone circle near the old camp. Honey and maple syrup in small clay bowls. Stood back and waited. Just before dusk, heard what sounded like children laughing among the trees. Caught glimpses of movement, small figures darting between the pines. They're still here. They're still children in some way. And she knows it. The final entry was dated September 5th, 1923, leaving more offerings tonight. Larger amounts this time. The children come closer each evening. I've asked for permission to establish permanent feeding stations in the forest, but my request was denied. They don't understand what's happening here. The widow isn't our enemy. She's a mother looking for her children. And the children are not gone. They've simply changed form. I believe I can help them find each other. That was the last entry. The remaining pages were blank. I sat back in my chair, my eyes tired from reading, my mind racing with implications. Fisher had discovered something fundamental about the widow that everyone else had missed or ignored. She wasn't hunting people out of vengeance. She was asking for help, becoming violent only when denied or threatened. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Fleming's name flashed on the screen. I answered. "Hello? Carter, we've got a situation." Fleming's voice sounded strained. "There are reports of small forest fires appearing on the outskirts of Seattle. Not natural fires. They're circular, appearing suddenly, and then going out just as fast." My stomach tightened. "Where exactly?" "Getting closer to your location each time. Last one was less than 5 miles from your sister's neighborhood. She's tracking me," I said, the realization settling in my gut like a stone. You need to get out of there. I can have someone pick you. No. I cut him off, looking down at Fisher's journal open in front of me. I don't think that's necessary. Carter, listen to me. I'll call you back. I hung up before he could argue. I walked to my bedroom and pushed aside the curtain covering the balcony door. There they were again. Small barefoot prints in the thin layer of dust on the balcony floor. They appeared every night now, no matter how many times I cleaned them away. I'd been seeing them as a threat, a sign that she was coming for me. But as I stood there, Fisher's journals fresh in my mind, understanding finally took shape. The widow, Sage, wasn't hunting me. She'd never been hunting me. She was asking for my help in the only way she knew how.